Hi, I'm a new Dungeon Master trying to run their first D&D game. I put up an LFG asking for 5 players to play on Sundays at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. I spent countless hours crafting the setting and even dropped some money on books that would help make my transition from player to Dungeon Master a comfortable one. The day comes, the players submit their sheets before the day, and no one even bothers to show up, despite them saying they'll be able to, and this is the second time it's happened. Now I gotta look for another group that'll actually bother to show up. I was excited to do this all week, and now I'm pissed off because now I gotta dig through the hellscape that is r/LFG for the second time, and finding players on there that are available to play all at the same time together is rarer than finding a unicorn in real life. You know why I read stories like this? It's because it makes me all the more grateful for my good friends who have been playing with me for years actually showing up to my games. Is that a bit self-aggrandizing? Yes it is. But come on, let me have this, alright? So this is a story that I am only tangentially involved in. However, let's just say it's the reason I became the Dungeon Master for my now former playgroup. So the playgroup's old DM, let's call him Kale. He was a bit creatively bankrupt. He was also a compulsive liar who would lie about the most insignificant of things, like saying a dragon's scales were red after a player drew it as a blue dragon, and it had always been red, despite him saying it was a blue dragon multiple times throughout the campaign, including during the dragon's introduction. He would also rip off various franchises wholesale and try to pass it off as his own creations, despite everyone in the playgroup being familiar with the franchise he was plagiarizing. But he was the only experienced dungeon master in the group, so they just stuck with it. Kale was running a homebrew campaign that is effectively the plot of Dark Souls in the world of Xenoblade, as in the world was on the remains of a giant robot arm. He forced one of the players to play a half-elf with blue eyes, blonde hair, and a huge red sword with a hole in the hilt, and the goal of the campaign was to obtain the Dark Soul. Due to scheduling, they only got to have sessions around once a month. So they were going through the campaign for about 2 years. Right before they were about to confront a major boss, the party ended up in a quick side quest that was supposed to be, a fast, quick thing. Massive scare quotes on the quick. The side quest stretched on for another 2 years, the length of the rest of the campaign up until then. What's more, the side quest had no business being a side quest, having them stop a ripoff of Manus, Father of the Abyss, from destroying the world. And the stolen cherry on top of the plagiarized cake, Kale dropped right out of DMing right before they were about to fight Not Magnus, saying that he was getting bored of the campaign. He ended it right before they were about to fight a world-ending boss, which they got dragged into fighting right before they were going to fight another major campaign world-ending boss. I found out about a lot of this due to a conversation I was having with the playgroup after the fact, so there's not really a timeline for what I'm about to list off, but a lot of weird stuff happened. Some of the original bosses that Kale quote-unquote created for the party were an old man with a flaming sword named Gwyn, kind of sunlight, a tall knight in blue armor with a broken left arm and a greatsword in his left hand, a large black dragon with a singular glowing eye in the center of a pointed face, a girlfriend of that tall knight who was a carbon copy of Lord's Blade Kiaran? I'm not a fan of any of these franchises. Whose name he claimed he got from a random name generator. There was a merchant who was a giant with a wooden longbow who was blind that was named Hawkeye Vinch. There was a DMPC the party had to deal with who was a talking direwolf who wielded a great sword in his mouth and was saved by that tall knight. There was a creepy moment involving a seemingly terrified little girl who was then approached by the rogue in the party who turned out to be a succubus in disguise and tried to charm the player with a kiss. At one point, Kale had a girlfriend who joined the campaign. She got pretty preferential treatment, though I'm told that she was unaware of that fact due to being brand new to tabletop role-playing games. At one point, the two of them broke up. Kale responded by saying during the next session that the floating city the party was on had collapsed from the sky, and without rolling any dice, announced that everyone except the girlfriend's character survived, including all of the people living on the floating city. This whole crash, there was one casualty. Kale's balancing for encounters, especially bosses, was awful. He had railroaded everyone's character progression, even going so far as to create a chart showing what everyone would get for each level, including homebrew stuff past 20. The entire party was super overpowered, to the point where the rogue was able to one-shot Not Calamite after Kale had spent weeks hyping him up as dangerous and deadly as an encounter. During a different non-homebrew campaign in Horde of the Dragon Queen, one of the characters, the guy who was forced to play the half-elf with the Monado, he managed to kill Tiamat through creative tactics. His reward? Tiamat's corpse exploded, insta-killing him, and no one else, without any dice being rolled. And one last thing, everyone, myself included, actually went to the same school, which is how the playgroup got together. Since I wasn't a direct part of the campaign, Kale would sometimes share details of the campaign with me, including his eventual final boss. The final boss? The Soul of Cinder. Now look guys, as you know if you've watched this channel before, I rip things off. Everyone rips off stuff, and I think that's great. I think it's okay to rip things off in your D&D game. You're not trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to storytelling, and basing your story off of other things, that's good. Hell, taking things wholesale, I think that's fine too. But the horror story here is all of the lying, and also forcing players to build into the things you're ripping off. The point of D&D is to be creative, and if players want to do their own thing, that's good. Now, of course, they should create characters that fit into the campaign ideally, but forcing people to play the specific characters from the thing you're ripping off, not good. Also, I'm all for taking things wholesale, like I said, but here, it's a little too blatant. You need to at least change some things, otherwise the immersion is going to end up being broken. And here, yeah, if you know what Dark Souls is, or you're into Xenoblade, the immersion might be just a tad shattered. Near the end of my Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Exandria campaign, I ran a session with 2 combat encounters in the Ashkeeper Peaks of Wildmount with an 8th level party. For the first encounter, the party was searching for the missing companion of an injured Ravenite, aka a Dragonborn hunter, who had vanished after the 2 were ambushed by a hag coven. The party confronts the coven, consisting of a modified Annis hag, Beer hag, and Night hag, based not so subtly on Beldam, Marilyn, and Vivian from Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. Beer Hag stood atop an elevated plateau, throwing ice shards and casting innate spells. Annis tanked the hits from the Palabard and the Echo Knight fighter, while Night Hag supported the Annis Hag by casting control spells at the frontliners. The Palabard got dominated by the Night Hag and was forced to turn on the party, so the Echo Knight swapped places with his Echo and knocked the Night Hag out of her concentration. The 2 frontliners then tried to bring down the Night Hag to prevent another charm spell. She got dangerously low, but lived to see single-digit health on her turn, so she used her Heartstone to go into the ethereal plane and flee. The Annis Hag was killed and the party advanced on the Beer Hag, who was reduced to 20 hit points, so when her turn came around, she threw out a Cone of Cold, downing the Palabard and heavily wounding the Echo Knight before using her Grey Staff with a flying speed of 50 feet to begin flying to safety through the diminishing cloudy weather she had casted before the fight. Wanting to keep things moving rather quickly, I gave the Ranger, Sorcerer, and Rogue 1 round to down her before she escaped. The Sorcerer misses all 3 Scorching Rays, Rogue misses his bow shot, and Ranger uses his innate feature to cast Sleep, coming 1 hit point short with 19, so the hag screeches she'll get revenge one day as she disappears into the blizzard above. When the dust settles, Sorcerer seems really agitated, makes a comment about how awfully low these clouds are. The party saves the captured Dragonborn and even found a dancing sword for their troubles as well. After receiving the couple's thanks, they shared their campsite for an hour. The party continued on and wound up in encounter number 2, with a Gloomstalker, a Wildmount monster, and a pair of Shadowgas as the opponents this time. Things looked dicey for a bit, but the party managed to turn the tide. The Gloomstalker was on its last bit of hit points, and when its turn comes around, its paralyzing shriek recharged. It uses the shriek, and everyone except the Palabard and Echo Knight failed their saves and were paralyzed until the Gloomstalker's next turn. The Gloomstalker then uses the rest of its turn to move its full 80 feet flying speed plus 40 feet bonus action to teleport away and begin fleeing. And the only one in the party that could have a hit was the fighter with his crossbow, and he opted not to fire, so the Gloomstalker escapes into the night. Sorcerer immediately drops from the Discord call upon me declaring the session's end, which unnerves me a little since we usually unwind and chat a little in the post-game. I message him asking if he's okay, and he responds with, "Yeah, I just thought last night was a bad session, so instead of dwelling on it, I went and did something I actually enjoyed." I ask why he thought it was a bad session. He responds, "Escaping enemies should be the exception, not the rule. An enemy escape should be used with an overarching villain or to drive the plot forward. Never on one-off fights, and certainly not on random encounters. Enemies fleeing to add a sense of realism, sure. But to say they just got away is kind of BS, especially when the players have ways to stop them." I tell him I understand his criticism and that I haven't really seen all that many retreats on either player or monster sides in my DMing, so it's possible that I could be in the wrong here. So, am I the a-hole in this situation for robbing my players of victories at the last second of those encounters? You didn't. Let me explain. Drumroll, please. Not the a-hole. I get why this could be frustrating if it's happening every single session, but number one, unless you're using XP rules, it doesn't really matter if you get the final blow on all the enemies, so them retreating is still a victory. You drove them back. You won the fight, objectively so. The Sorcerer claims this should be the exception, not the rule, but it seems to be the exception. The DM does directly say that they don't really see all that many retreats in their games, so I don't really know why the Sorcerer is so miffed about it. I mean, heck, in my games, enemies run away all the time, and my players need to harvest their bodies in order to progress in the game. That's where they get all their magic items from, and my players never whinge about it. Look, even if the Sorcerer was right, and I don't think they are, this is a terrible way to criticize your Dungeon Master. I mean, critique doesn't need to be delivered with feather down and roses, but a snarky and sarcastic commentary after rage quitting from the chat, it's not going to do your fragile critique any sort of favors. Hey everyone, this happened somewhat recently, but was difficult for me to deal with, so I wanted to sit with it before posting about it since a lot of details are now fuzzy. This is also an active campaign, and while the problem player infuriated me to no end, I think they have a lot of issues they need to work through, but at the same time I bear them no ill will, so please don't call them out, harass them or anything if you know them. I just need to get this off my chest. The campaign had a large number of players to start, but the most noteworthy ones in the story are myself, Dave, and the Dungeon Master. I've DM'd more games than I've played, so when an interesting looking 5th edition campaign in a homebrew world came up from a newer Dungeon Master on Discord, I hopped at the chance to join. We had a good amount of time to socialize and work on our characters before our first game. I really wanted to do something unique and interesting, so I played a delusional kobold that thought they were a dragon. We did some reflavoring, but kept things mechanically the same. So for instance, burning hands came from my mouth. Everyone seemed pretty chill, but there was one person that was far more active on the server than everyone else. Dave. Dave had some kind of job, we never figured out what this was, where they weren't allowed on the computer but could talk and speak out loud. So they would frequently ask people to go onto voice chat and do calls with them. I know we were going to be speaking to everyone once the game started, but as all of my prior experience was in person, it still made me a bit uncomfortable to do a voice call with someone one-on-one. So while I didn't mind chatting with them solo, I did keep making excuses to not make this call. Session 1 seemed fine. They did things that kept drawing attention to their character and would push the Dungeon Master to allow them to do certain things in their backstory/background that didn't make sense in the DM's homebrew setting. Nothing too major, but stuff like, it says I can sleep at the guard post in the city as part of my background. I'm a guard in this city, and I can sleep there and bring in some people, right? There's not really an organized military/martial presence in this really small town. But it says right here in my background I can do it. And that sort of repeated until the DM relented, and that was sort of the pattern. So after the first session, they messaged me saying, "Hey, I have this great magic item I will be giving myself before the next session." I was a little confused that they were messaging me instead of the Dungeon Master, but I figured they were just trying to brainstorm before approaching them. Holy cow, Batman, the description of what this magic item could do was 2 whole pages. I crunched some numbers and quickly realized that this magic item was not only capable of keeping the whole party consistently healed, it could also one-shot a Tarrasque. I was a bit flabbergasted and pointed out that it was capable of killing, as a bonus action, the highest published challenge rating monster in the game, and they responded with, Yeah, I know, that was one of the things I wanted to do when I built it. So, some brief background on the Dungeon Master's world and the campaign. This was a very low magic setting, and we were all starting at level 3. In terms of magic items, we've so far come across cantrip spell scrolls, a coin of delving, and a cloak of billowing. Still, I figured maybe they were just unfamiliar or awkward, and they were so eager, so I tried to help them. I thought about what they wanted to do conceptually with their item and create something that had some level-based scaling. And it was fairly effective, but far more balanced and in line with someone might have at level 3 in a campaign, and figured with DM approval and maybe some sort of quest, it could be acquirable. Quick cue, why is the DM not including this conversation from, like, the get-go?
You know, those two stayed after the session for, like, a long time. Wonder what they were talking about.
Yesterday.
You don't need to do this. Just put the laptop down. We can talk about this, okay?
Nothing can be done. You can't stop it now.
If you introduce this into the game, you'd be able to one-shot a Tarask. The game balance would be destroyed forever. You know that. You have to stop. Put the laptop down.
It's not enough power. The homebrew is not strong enough yet, but it will be. It will be soon.
Don't do it. There's no need to escalate this.
No, I can't. It's too late. See you on the other side.
No! Probably wasn't important.
Anyway, I told them that their idea was pretty overpowered, especially for level 3, and suggested the more balanced item to them. The description only took 1 paragraph. They responded that the item was totally useless, and I didn't hear about them until the next session. This is where things went totally off the hook. Since the Dungeon Master allowed him to be a guard and bunk with a couple of the other party members there, he used this as a quest hook. The head of the guards gave him a quest, and he went to wake up the other party members who stayed with him. Half of us had stayed behind an inn. The group wanted to have some downtime / shopping / socializing this session, so they went off to the market. The DM asked them, "Are you going straight there, or are you going to the inn first to get rest for the party?" "Nope, we're going straight there." "Are you sure the rest of the party is still at the inn?" "Yes, we're going straight to the market." They bought a gust spell scroll, but didn't realize that as a fighter, they weren't able to use it. He went to a blacksmith and asked them to make a set of tonfa. Should I know what that is? Oh, that's what those are called. The more you know. Anyway, it didn't really make sense in the setting for the blacksmith to have any idea what they were referring to, but Dave kept pushing, and eventually the Dungeon Master decided that if he can draw up the specifications really well, maybe the smith or another party member proficient in smithing could make this item, but that would be a difficult role and would have to have multiple skill check successes. He eventually goes back to the tavern and draws up multiple specs with a string of 17 plus rolls. He then engages in persuasion rolls, another string of 17 plus rolls, to convince other party members to buy those specs and his cantrip scrolls, and changes the price each time. But nobody wants to metagame, so he just scams the party. This takes hours. Some people got chances to interact and play Dungeons & Dragons, but the camera was always following Dave, so to speak. After a skill challenge and an immense amount of 17 plus rolls on Dave's end, they got their tonfa. They proceed to tell everyone about the qualities and the stats of it. It winds up being this wish list of weapon traits, plus bonus damage dice and bonus armor class. The Dungeon Master tries to stop him and tells him that he needs to figure out what its actual stats and properties are, but Dave insists they already had this conversation with the Dungeon Master, and that they told him this weapon could have all these properties, and that he should stay by this previous conversation. I made up some reason to head directly to the market myself. Something I forgot to mention, another player complained that I was talking over them in the previous session. I felt bad for this, as this is not something I want to do to another player. We figured that it was half because I spoke strongly and confidently, conditioned as part of my job, and half them having a quiet microphone. So I tried to be most careful when using my meeting voice, and turned everyone else's volume down and turned theirs to the max, so that the issue could be resolved. The reason I mentioned this is because I still felt bad, so I wanted to give gifts to the other party members. I had spent most of the week planning this out, so I needed to get to the market before the end of the session to buy them. We essentially just had starting gold and equipment, so I had to get creative to make meaningful gifts for the rest of the party, and it took up most of my starting equipment and all of my starting gold to do this. As Dave heard me doing this, Dave decided to say, "Hey everyone, let's plan out how our party will handle finances, and let's leave OP out of it because they're greedy and selfish." They proceed to plan and vote on how to handle finances, then proceeded with, "Also, I have this quest, let's discuss it and plan out how to proceed with it before OP gets back." I was pretty livid at this point. I had essentially sat out all session due to his decisions and was deliberately excluded from roleplay moments, campaign decisions, etc. I realized that my character also had every reason to be pissed off with the information they had available. So, as I returned and Dave announced the decisions the party had made, I challenged them on their behavior over the day. They responded with, "Well, you're a greedy dragon, so I know you're bad with money. I don't even need to guess. I just know that you spend all your money at the market. That proves I'm right. In fact, on our next quest, I can just tell the quest giver that you didn't participate and just keep your reward." Then things got weird. I just tried to ignore him and went around to the rest of the party, bequeathing my gifts to them.
Your bequeathal is at hand.
Do you have a regular job here?
They were mostly silly things: a kobold's best attempt to make a scented candle, some tinkerer's tools for the warforge, a chest set for the scholar, etc. Dave interrupted me pretty frequently for rolls to determine if I was good or evil. It didn't make much sense to me at the time, but now I'm fairly certain they were trying to justify attacking me by proving I'm the opposite alignment of whatever they were. They kept persuading the dungeon master until they finally let them do a series of rolls for it, and lo and behold, more 17 plus rolls culminating in a 19. The dungeon master decided he succeeded and asked me to tell him about my backstory and alignment. Here's the thing, I didn't really flesh out my whole backstory yet. I figured I could develop it as the character develops through play. I tried to share what I had come up with so far, but kept being pressed for more before I put my foot down and said, "Look, I don't care how well you rolled. You can't read my character's backstory and my inner thoughts with a skill check." The dungeon master finally agreed with me, and we ended the session. They took off, but some of us stayed on the call to just chat. Then Dave says, "You should never have tried to stand up to my character. Kobolds are cowardly. You're not playing your character correctly." I glanced at my character sheet and pointed out that I had the kobold trait Defiance, which gave me advantage against being frightened, so I don't think I needed to play them cowardly. They then dropped the line, "You know, I could kill your character anytime I wanted. You wouldn't be able to do anything to stop me." This wasn't one-on-one or anything either. This was in front of other party members. I laugh it off, but I'm a bit uncomfortable. He wasn't very knowledgeable about the game, and I was pretty confident in my tactics and character build, so I wasn't worried if they just attacked me out of the blue, but they always roll exceptionally high and could go for my character in their sleep, and I was getting worked up, so I made an excuse and just logged off. As the week progressed, it looked more and more likely they were going to get an OP magic item, and I kinda lost it. I went on a bit of a rant and told both him and the dungeon master I really think it's bad to give him this item because it's very powerful and he has already threatened to kill my character. I realized something at the same time that I suspect is a surprise to zero of you out there. He rolled physical dice. It's not something I had even considered, but suddenly I was incredibly suspicious of him not rolling below a 17 all session. I started mentally planning contingencies on what preparations I'll be making to protect myself and messaged the dungeon master in order for Dave not to metagame around them. At this point, I had a reality check. What was I even doing? This wasn't fun anymore. I had decided I would probably quit, but also went back and just wrote a heartfelt message about what I felt was antagonistic behavior from him, how it made me feel as a player, and potential steps we could take towards resolution. I then muted the server for 24 hours and tried to mentally prepare myself for telling them that I am no longer interested in continuing. I return and I'm shocked and surprised. A lot had transpired in those 24 hours. I had gotten a couple of messages of support from the dungeon master and some other party members. Other party members had started sharing their own grievances regarding Dave and how comfortable they were feeling. Dave did not respond at all well to any of this and blamed everyone except for himself. My favorite justification he made, that nobody seemed to buy, is that he had already messaged me and that I was alright with everything, which... yeah, no. Things were getting heated, and several people were really upset, and the dungeon master decided to just pull the trigger and kill him. I mean, The DM decided to pull the trigger and kick him. His character became an NPC and was later discovered dead in a ditch in the following session. So that's my horror story. Thanks for reading it through to the end. Some of the problems and issues other party members had with Dave were pretty shocking and warrant separate stories all on their own, but this has gone on long enough, and I'll leave it to them to tell their own stories if they choose to. I'd love to see that. Getting to the point, Dave does have a few problems. He had to go. Not in the death sort of way, in the kicking sort of way. The DM probably needed to do this a lot earlier. I understand why the DM probably shouldn't have been included in that initial conversation that I joked about in the beginning, because the DM didn't really have a lot of spine back then, and I get it. As a dungeon master, you're already handling a lot with all the prep and the game running. You got a lot on your plate without having to manage a jerkwad at the table. I mean, dang, I don't know if the DM was gonna give this dude the OP magic item they wanted that could one-shot a Tarask, but any sort of OP item, especially after they just threatened to kill a player character, not great. You shouldn't reward that kind of behavior. You need to talk about it. Though, in the end, I am glad that this all worked out. Man, Dave just has a whole collection of issues. Too many for me to talk about in a 1-minute analysis, but yeah, just glad he's gone. Let's just say that. Alright, and that's going to be it for today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. Before we end off, I just want to say that the support for the channel has been insane recently. You guys have been showing us a lot of love, and I just want you to know that I really, really appreciate it. So, to all the new people to the Tavern, welcome, and I hope you guys stick around. But anyway, if you guys want to let me know you enjoyed this particular video, then please leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then you can check out our Tabletop Tavern Tips series, where we cover D&D tips for both DMs and players, old and new, while you're there in the cards. Subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment. I think that's Dark Souls, to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Hey, by the way, if you have your own horror stories, you can send them directly to us. There is an email in the description. Send them our way for a chance to be featured in one of these videos. But hey, even if you don't have any stories, in essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.
No, the homebrew is too strong. The homebrew is too strong. If you implement this into the game, if you introduce this into the game, you'd be able to one-shot a Tarask.